All right, so now that we've taken a break, we're still on life insurance, still on the life insurance section of your plan. Just to go over kind of how we determine a client's need for life insurance or how we figure out how much life insurance is enough. There's about 5 ways that we can determine this. So typically of those 5, we choose the most complex and comprehensive methods to make sure that your needs are met. So, because life insurance itself should be on a needs based analysis. So we want to make sure that your simple income, is met. So while certain approaches work for different advisors, we're going to gather this information in a more conservative nature so that in the worst case scenario, we know that you're taken care of. So a needs-based analysis takes into consideration all of the following: final expenses, liquid assets, debt reduction, household expenses or salaries, your mortgage, any sort of expenses that are ongoing that, if something were to happen to you or you wouldn't be able to make your income and provide for your family, that the life insurance is providing that income for them. So in your case, we've come up with a table showing you numbers and how we arrived there. We calculated your capital needs to be about $2.875 million before taking assets and other insurances into account. We arrived at that number simply by using the $115,000 that you would like to have should something happen to one of you, and then we divided that number by a rate of return that we think is feasible in a conservative bond portfolio. So we used 4%. After subtracting out all of the one-time expenses included in the table, the existing liquid assets, and your existing life insurance policies, we arrived at a number around $2.3 million. So if you're taken back in your seat a bit by this amount, we think this is sufficient because it's an earnings approach. So this means that you can expect $92,000 a year just in a conservative portfolio using that 4%. So between dividends and returns, we feel that that's a sufficient number that you can use to live off of. So this assumes that you'll not be tapping into the principal amount. It just assumes that you pull that 4% out every year. So that's how we got to that $2.3 million number. So the issue that I've seen often is that people are underinsured. And in your case, you're both a little bit underinsured. So we recommend that you both purchase 20-year term life policies, $2 million each. So on the plan that we provided you with, we kind of go over the calculations we put together for your capital needs and how we came up with essentially the amount of insurance that you needed. And then we also went into a life insurance quote with 6 different carriers of different policies that we feel would be adequate coverage. So in terms of which policy to go with, of course, you'll have to do a test, when you apply for these additional insurance policies. But we did provide the quotes just to kind of give you an idea of what that might look like. So now moving on to disability insurance. This is another important piece of the risk management planning side of the plan. It's important because disability insurance helps you, provide income to your family if you're unable to work for some sort of physical condition. So, if in a dual income household per se, it's always nice to have both incomes protected. Typically, if it's a single home household, then there's a very large need for disability insurance because if anything were to happen to, that sole provider, there would be no coverage, if that income was lost. So we want to make sure that you're both covered in this case and that you both have disability insurance. Both of your group policies are own occupation covered. So before we get into that, let me explain kind of the different tiers of disability coverage. that are offered. So any occupation is usually free group coverage. So if you both become disabled, the carrier will pay you for your 2 years. After that time, if you can do any other job or you can make an income, you will not be considered disabled. So it's kind of that 2-year limit. And after that 2 years, your benefits cut. Own occupation states that if you become disabled, they will pay as long as you cannot return to work in your full capacity. However, you cannot go back to work to supplement your benefit in any other capacity, or they'll cut your benefit, immediately. So essentially, if you can work at all and you're not disabled, then they're going to cut that benefit. True own occupation coverage is specific to professionals such as physicians who would like to protect their income and be able to go back and do research or teaching if they cannot still do surgery. So, say a surgeon, injures their right hand, and that's how they operate. This type of coverage, true own occupation coverage, allows you to still contribute and earn income in a different way, just not using the skills that you once did. So own occupation coverage is more than ample for your situation specifically, and you have no elimination period for the short term. So it's 90 days for your long term. Typically, we would not recommend having an elimination period any longer than 90 days, because that means that you would have enough cash reserves to get you to day 90 before you can start collecting your benefit. So in your specific case, in terms of disability insurance, Mia, you would be able to collect $22,747 annually in post-tax money, and Tyler would be able to collect $43,844. Since your employer is paying the premiums, the benefit will be taxable, and those are reflected showing a tax bracket of 25%. So unfortunately, with disability insurance, you can't apply the individual side and expect to, pile up more coverage above and beyond 60% of earnings. But that's pretty normal. It's not meant to make you whole again. That's what life insurance is for. But it's something to kind of cover you while you're disabled and while you can't work and provide that income. And it should cover costs and living expenses, among other things. We were very glad to see that you have residential disability, the rider on both of your policies. So kudos to you for having that. And what that means is that if you go back to work without being, at full capacity or completely back to normal, you can continue to collect a partial benefit. So usually it's around 15 to 20% loss of income before your disability, and then you can collect partially. Moving on to auto insurance, your current coverage of $100, $350 we feel looks sufficient, along with your uninsured motorist coverage. Each state has minimum requirements, and Missouri calls for 25, 50, 10. You have split limited coverage, which means that you'll pay up to $100,000 for bodily injury with a maximum of $300,000 total. So if one person sues for over $100,000, you would not be covered, and the only way to get to the $300,000 max would be if the 3 single persons each claimed $100,000 in damages. So the coverage is not as comprehensive as a single limit policy, but it's sufficient, especially taking your umbrella policy into account, which we will recommend that you add some coverage. So with your homeowner's insurance, moving on to that, you have an HO3 policy with $100,000 liability limit. What that means, this is actually the most popular type of homeowner's insurance, and it's also known as an all-risk policy. So what that means is that your home is covered if anything that isn't listed on the exclusions, is covered. So most of these policies exclude things like earthquakes, floods, war, nuclear hazard, things like that. So we double checked for the FEMA website, and it appears that you do not live in a high-risk flood zone. So we don't feel that you necessarily need additional coverage. or flood zone insurance. So you're also paying $700 a year when the average is around 1,200. So your home is worth 150,000 currently, and you're insured up to 225,000, which is smart because typically it will take significantly more money to rebuild your home if something happens. So it's good that you have that, additional coverage. Let's see. It does seem that your endorsement is an extended replacement coverage rider, which allows you to collect more than the fair market value of the home in case of any sort of needed construction or rebuild. And we would recommend increasing your umbrella coverage to $1 million. That will add an additional expense of $75 a year, but we feel that's sufficient just because your total net worth is just under $900,000. It's about $881,823. So you would want to insure your net worth definitely by increasing your umbrella policy. Long-term care covers, it's an insurance policy that you pay into for any sort of medical needs that aren't covered by Medicare or Medicaid or any sort of additional policies throughout retirement. So covers things like hospice or 24-hour nursing care in home, Alzheimer's, any sort of kind of specialized need where if you were to get sick or something were to happen where you couldn't, physically take care of yourself on a daily basis, it becomes extremely expensive. So long-term care policies will kind of help supplement that cost. It's an important topic to cover just to make sure you understand what it is, and it might become important down the road. The general rule is that people with a net worth of less than $250,000 or more than $1.5 million do not need long-term care, and your family is nearing $1 million, and they may not need it in the future, just depending on what your needs are, how your health is. But we do still like to talk about it and make sure we touch on the subject. People are living longer, with medical innovations and lives are, being extended. But medical costs are skyrocketing, and we do feel that these costs, on an annual basis, we anticipate that they would inflate about 6.5% a year. So, it's sad to see, but elderly people are left holding the bill for things that maybe they could have planned for in the past. So functional abilities are kind of how it's determined if you might need long-term care or if it would be appropriate for someone who might need to fund this sort of future expense. Typically, an eligible person it's based on the functional ability or medical necessity of whoever the insured is to perform at least 3 of the 6 activities of daily living. So if you can't perform 3 of these, then you would, kind of pay out of pocket per se if you didn't have long-term care for these additional medical costs. So if you can't eat on your own, if you can't go to the restroom on your own, if you can't get from A to B, to walk across the room to do something for yourself, like getting from your bed to a chair, if you can't bathe yourself or dress yourself or even, just, brushing your teeth or something like that. The average cost for a nursing home room or something like that back in 2015 was over $80,000. So it just kind of gives you the idea of a cost today, which is likely to increase, at a rapid rate. So we did see that neither of you have any sort of family history that would point you to needing it, but that doesn't always mean that you won't need it in the future or that it wouldn't be a priority to you later on. So we did want to mention it. If you did need long-term care, we would kind of put together a recommendation and see what a good coverage or policy would be for you. So before we dive into investment planning, let's take a quick break.